Are J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards as good as gone from the Baltimore Ravens? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We're your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for being here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form, wherever you get your shows. We bring you 5 days a week of Ravens content, both platforms, video and audio, so you're not missing out on any content any which way you want to watch or listen to the shows. Ravens news, analysis, updates, we have you covered, and really appreciate all the support that I've gotten here on Locked On Ravens over the years. This is episode 1,195 consecutively for me. So coming up on 1,200 next week. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with winning $5 bets. $150. If your bet wins, visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Weekend coming up. We're getting closer and closer to free agency. We're actually right in the middle of the combine. The first test day was yesterday. We got defensive linemen, edge players. We'll talk about that in the second part of the show, some early combine standouts and what to look ahead to as the weekend continues with the combine. But I first want to get into a conversation about J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, mainly because yesterday we saw a video. J.K. Dobbins put out a video of him working out and rehabbing just about 6 months after he tore his Achilles and had surgery on that Achilles. And he looked good, looked fast, looked explosive. Obviously, there's still a recovery process from him coming back from that injury because it's not all the way done yet, but he's making a lot of progress. And so to me and to a lot of other people, it kind of raised the question of, well, what's the status of JK? What's the status of Gus Edwards? Will those two guys be back in Baltimore? We've talked about it here and there, so we'll talk about that. Then in the final part of the show, we'll talk about who can help transform the Ravens. Will it be draft picks? Will it be free agents? Will it be their own guys who are already there? Which players can help the Ravens transform and evolve almost to the next level? So a lot to get to here on the show today. Let's first start off with the J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards conversation. And this is one that's really interesting to me because we've gone over the Ravens running back position a lot. We've talked about Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, et cetera, et cetera. Really, really talented free agent class, but that also includes some Ravens running backs, right? Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins. You can even throw Dalvin Cook in there, although that was a really weird signing. I don't necessarily know if Dalvin's coming back or not. I wouldn't necessarily bet on that. But there are a lot of people who are saying, look, Gus Edwards scored 13 touchdowns last year, still averaged over 4 yards per carry. J.K. Dobbins, the potential to sky high still despite the injuries. But then you have the flip side of that. And obviously with Dobbins, it is the injuries. And with Gus Edwards, it's, well, his efficiency went down by almost a 4 yard per carry last season. And he is getting somewhat up there in age in terms of running backs, where, again, the running back position right now is just so devalued compared to where other positions are in the league right now. You talk about premium positions. To me, that's quarterback, wide receiver, offensive line, edge rusher, cornerback. Those are your 5 premium positions in the league. Running back is probably the least premium position, and it's unfortunate because of how many talented players there are and what they contribute to an NFL team week in and week out. Now, for both of those guys, it's an interesting conversation because we've seen the Ravens have so much success with both those guys in the backfield, but with 3 free agents plus Keaton Mitchell coming back from his torn ACL, and we don't know if that's going to be, maybe he comes back before the season starts, just barely. Maybe he has to miss a part of the year, go on the PUP list, or maybe they put him on IR and have him come back and use a designation on him. I don't know what that's going to look like, but something has to happen in the Ravens running back room because you only have Justice Hill right now. Everybody else is either a free agent or injured. So for Edwards, we'll start with him, and then we'll get into Dobbins and talk about his rehab a little bit more. Edwards, he's been that beacon of consistency for the Ravens over the course of his career. This was the first time in Gus Edwards' career that he did not average more or at 5 yards per carry. He had been that guy for them forever. Rookie year, 5.2. Second year, 5.3. Third year, 5. missed 2021, comes back and has 5 yards per carry again. But I mentioned 2023, that number dropped to 4.1. Still a great short yardage back, still able to do a lot of different things in terms of he's not just a north-south runner. He's evolved his game. He can cut back now, do a lot of certain things. But with Edwards, him being a 6'1", 238-pound bruiser, you need a guy like that on your roster, and he's not going to cost a lot. I personally would be fine with bringing Gus Edwards back because the reality of the situation is how much money do you want to spend on a running back? There are a lot of people who would love Derrick Henry in Baltimore. I am one of those people. I would love Derrick Henry in Baltimore. But there's a certain point with either a Henry or a Barkley or a Jacobs where you're thinking that's just too much money, especially considering what the Ravens have in their own free agents. Like, if they tag Madubuike versus extending him, that's a conversation based off of the cap that would be on the books for them. Patrick Queen, Geno Stone, Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy, Ronald Darby, Odo Beckham, Kevin Zeitler. I mean, so many. So how much money are you spending on a running back? For Derrick Henry, CBS Sports officially predicted him to sign with the Ravens on a 2-year, $18 million deal. So that's $9 million per season. But Gus Edwards, I'd only expect him to get maybe $2 to $4 million per season, in that range. So does Derrick Henry elevate your offense to the point where it's worth spending the extra 5 to 7 mil on him? I think it's worth it, but I still think Edwards would be a really quality option to have there. Now for Dobbins, this is an interesting one because I'm a big J.K. Dobbins guy. I have been ever since, even back at Ohio State, huge J.K. Dobbins guy. Now, the issue with Dobbins has been his injuries. Came in and just burst on the scene as a rookie, averaged 6.0 yards per carry, which was the best among all running backs. Actually, in terms of all players, only trailed Lamar Jackson, his teammate, and Kyler Murray at all positions. Was awesome. But then obviously suffered the torn ACL in 2021. Came back in 2022 and only played in 8 games. He had to have the cleanup surgery after coming back in week 3. And he looked good again, 5.7 yards per carry on almost 100 carries. It was good for him. And then 2023 only has 8 carries, has 22 yards and a touchdown, but tears the Achilles. And I think it's unfortunate we have to label Dobbins as injury prone right now, but it's just the reality of what the situation is. So I would love Dobbins back. I think he's a very talented running back. You can get him on the cheap. I would not expect him to get also anywhere from $2 to $4 million. I think it's going to be a 1-year prove-it deal wherever he goes. But at this point, I just feel like it might even be Dobbins who's saying, look, it was great, great for the Ravens for drafting me. But, I just feel like for him, does he want to continue to come back to the place where he suffered all these injuries and his career has changed before his eyes? I think he might just want a fresh start. I just think that might be the path that he wants to go down. And I wouldn't blame him if that's the case. I think a team like, I would have said the Chargers if Greg Roman wasn't there, but him and Greg Roman, if you remember, had that. Well, Dobbins called out the fact that he wasn't getting the ball enough, and that was not great. So I'm not sure where he would go, but I'm seeing less and less of a path, honestly, for him to come back to the Ravens, which is unfortunate because I really like JK. I think he's super competitive and somebody that leaves it all on the field. But at this point, you need more of a sure thing, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. And we can't just sit here and try to gloss over, he's had all these injuries, right? That's a big part of his story. He's only played in that one full season, and that was his rookie year. Well, he played in 15 games. He missed the game due to COVID, but technically played a full season outside of that one. So I would be fine with the Ravens bringing Gus Edwards back. Maybe that looks like a reduced role, but I also feel like, look, Derrick Henry and Gus Edwards aren't the exact same player, but I feel like you only need one big bruiser. Now, I think Derrick Henry is a little more complete than Gus Edwards, but can those two coexist with the Justice Hill? And then when Keaton comes back, you essentially have 4 running backs. Who are you making inactive? Because my thing is I like to activate 3 guys at the running back position. I think that's really all you need. And I just feel like it's going to be, you got to choose between a Derrick Henry and a Gus Edwards. I'm personally choosing Derrick Henry in that scenario. For JK, I mean, he's better than a 4th running back on a team when everybody's healthy, right? He's just better than that. So you have to make a choice, in my opinion. And I think the choice is, I would not be shocked if both Dobbins and Edwards don't return to the Ravens in 2024. And you have something that looks like Derrick Henry, Justice Hill, a mid to late round running back that you take this year. And then when Keaton Mitchell comes back, so essentially that mid to late round guy is your 3rd running back. And then when Keaton comes back, he slots in, and that mid to late round running back kind of takes a back seat. To me, I think that's the most realistic scenario for the Ravens. John Harbaugh, well, Eric DeCosta talked about it, and he said that it's going to be some change. They only have two running backs right now, and that's Justice Hill and Keaton Mitchell. One of them, Keaton Mitchell's injured, so they got to figure out what to do. I expect major change in the running back room in 2024 for Baltimore. Coming up in the second part of the show, I'll be talking about some early combine standouts and what to expect from the combine as the Ravens look to add their next talented draft class. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with a $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. The NBA is in full swing right now. Obviously, there's no football anymore, and the MLB is coming up pretty soon. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. I'm a big Denver Nuggets fan, so of course, Nikola Jokic. If I'm looking on FanDuel, I'm looking Nuggets. I'm looking Jokic for that. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher coming to you on this Purple Friday. I hope everybody has a nice weekend lined up in store. We're getting closer to free agency. It's going to be a really exciting time, and hopefully a time the Ravens can add some new pieces, but the Ravens can also add some pieces in the 2024 draft, and the NFL Scouting Combine is underway. We got the first day of testing in the books yesterday, defensive linemen and edge players, outside linebackers. So you have a lot of different good players when it comes to who the Ravens could potentially take and what positions they could take. Now, for Baltimore defensive line, if they bring back Justin Madubuike, it's not going to be a huge need for him. Edge is certainly one you could be looking at with a lot of unproven talent and free agents on the board there. Wouldn't be shocked. And there were some early combine standouts that I want to kind of talk about first, and then what to expect. We'll get into that from the rest of the combine. So first of all, I think Braden Fisk from Florida State, he's 6'4", 292 pounds. He ran a 4.37 shuttle, which was that's incredible. And Dane Brugler actually put out for perspective, Aaron Donald posted a 4.39. So that's one athletic guy. I mean, the on-field drills, he was awesome. His measurables were great too. And I think for me, he's a player that was kind of getting like he was a day 2 pick for a lot of people. He might sneak into the back end of the first round just based off of the combine. And I think the combine, there is a lot of weight that's held in the combine. Guys can improve their draft stack by a couple rounds, or they can decrease it by a couple of rounds as well. Now, Byron Murphy, who by a lot of people is actually billed up as the best defensive lineman in this year's class, he was good. He was good. Now, it wasn't like he was the best guy on the field at the combine, but still, I think he didn't hurt his stock, and I still think we could see him going. Now, there's a lot of other people who, again, a guy like Johnny Newton who had foot surgery, he couldn't participate. He's somebody who is a defensive lineman. I think he's someone that's going to go in the first round. We're going to see Devondre Sweat out of Texas. Texas had a big defensive line group here as well, but his weight was great, and his movement skills are really good on display too. Now, Chris Jenkins, who is the son of Chris Jenkins, the great defensive lineman, he was a good player at Michigan, and somebody that I think for me, he improved his stock. His speed was great. His bend was awesome. And that was someone who I really thought was good. Now, Brandon Dorlus is someone who was kind of in that like second to third round range. He did not do great, but I'm not necessarily sure that, with his measurables, it was awesome. He has the tweener measurables for a defensive lineman, plus his on-the-field drills weren't wonderful. You're looking at some of the linebacker prospects. I think the guy that you have to talk about here is Chop Robinson out of Penn State. Ran a 4.49 at 254 pounds on the 40. I mean, how crazy is that? That to me, and Chop Robinson was kind of in the middle second round, early second round. I think he's a surefire first round prospect now. Chop Robinson is a guy that we actually talked about a little bit over the course of the week, where he wants to sack Lamar Jackson. He was asked, and he's a local guy. He's a Maryland guy. Grew up as a Ravens fan, and he talked about how the quarterback he wants to sack the most in the NFL is Lamar Jackson. I don't know if he's going to have that opportunity because maybe the Ravens actually draft him, but who knows if he actually gets to 30 anymore. Now, Braylon Trice is someone who, out of Washington, definitely did not have a great day. His 40 time was slow. And I think when you talk about the combine, there are so many different ways that you can look at it. Teams value it differently, right? Some teams, they care more about other measurables or what pro days look like or this, that, and the other, right? It's not necessarily just about the combine, but we have seen prospects tank their value on combine day. I mean, Orlando Brown Jr. is a prime example of this, where he was regarded, I think, by a lot of people as maybe a late first round prospect. His combine was terrible. His combine was awful. He falls all the way to the middle of the third round and end of the third roundish, I guess, with the Ravens. And he's gone on to become a really, really good tackle in this league. So for a guy like Raylan Trice, I think his stock has dropped, but some of these guys can help out the Ravens. Now, again, we're going to figure out the rest of these guys. Again, it was just defensive line linebackers yesterday, but it's going to be interesting with the rest of this now in terms of who is actually going to test today and throughout the rest of the weekend. You have defensive backs and tight ends testing today, so you're going to have that. Then quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs are all on Saturday. Then you have the offensive linemen rounding out the group on Sunday. So I think the big day, or I guess a couple big days here for the Ravens, it's honestly that all three of these days here are important, these next three, because you have the defensive backs, which I think the Ravens will be in the market for. Then you have wide receivers and running backs, so I think the Ravens will take at least one of each in this draft. And then you have offensive linemen, and we know the Ravens' offensive line essentially might have, I mean, I don't think it's going to get to this extreme, but they're going to essentially maybe have 4 new starters on this line in the next 3 years, right? They're going to have to start to retool and rebuild. So there are going to be a lot of prospects, and it's a very deep tackle class. It is. So I'm excited to see how these guys perform and how these guys end up trying to improve their stock. Because again, and it's also not just the combine in terms of the on-field stuff and the measurables. Players and teams are meeting, right? These teams are trying to get to know the players trying to get to know the team. So it's in terms of, can you fit a team? Can you fit an organization if you're a player, not only from on the field and your off the field stuff, but how do you kind of mesh and vibe with the team, right? Sometimes it's just about the vibes. And for the Ravens, Eric DeCosta and company are very particular about the type of prospects. And again, for DeCosta, he kind of actually talked about what he actually views in a prospect and what he actually takes away, what he values. He said integrity, work ethic, dependability, growth, grit, all these types of things. So you can be awesome, but if you don't vibe, then there are some teams that just will take you off their board. And the Ravens, I think, have a really solid process, but the combine is important in terms of figuring out athleticism and measurables. And I think the Ravens do, especially on the offensive line, want to get more athletic. So I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if the Ravens were to take some guys who, again, the Ravens, for example, offensive linemen, they value measurables in terms of arm length with the offensive line. So they usually don't take guys with necessarily super short arms. It's just something they don't like, something they don't value. Other teams are fine with that. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out there. Coming up, though, we'll be talking about who can help transform the Ravens. Is it going to be a draft pick? Is it going to be a free agent? Is it going to be one of their own players already on the roster? Stay tuned. Planning to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you'd do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run, take a nap, read a book, show up for a friend? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it priorities. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. Therapy has a ton of benefits, whether it's learning positive coping skills, setting boundaries, empowering you to become this version of yourself. It is just for those who experience major trauma as well as for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is go to a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Friday. Again, really appreciate everybody for being here on Locked On Ravens today, listening to the show, whether you're in video form or audio form. You can subscribe and follow along video form and audio form. Really appreciate both our audio community, which has been amazing since day one, and the video community started up over there a couple years later, but it's still been equally as awesome. We're also building up social media, building up on subtext. So this show has been so cool just to have all these growth milestones, and we're going to continue hitting them here on Locked On Ravens. Really excited for it. And we've covered a lot of Ravens teams. I've covered a lot of Ravens teams here, and every team that I've covered seems to have these transformation guys, transformation players that you either sign or you draft or you trade for, and boom, right? It just transforms a certain aspect. I think the most glaring example of this over the past couple of years has been Roquan Smith. Roquan Smith comes in, and to me, I mean, look, he transformed that defense. He elevated everybody. I know there was all the conversation about, oh, Patrick Queen wasn't good, and then Roquan came in and he became good. First of all, not true. Patrick Queen was hitting his stride before Roquan came in. Roquan comes in, elevates everybody. That includes Patrick Queen. And Queen was able to figure things out on his own as well. But Roquan has, not only from his on-field play, but from his leadership, his off-the-field stuff. I mean, everything he has done embodies the Ravens and embodies what this team values. When they made that trade, I think people forget, when they made that trade, he was scheduled to be a free agent. They gave up a second-round pick, a fifth-round pick, and A.J. Klein, Ravens legend A.J. Klein, for Roquan. And that was a lot to give up for essentially what could have been a rental. Because look, trades sometimes don't work out. For example, Yannick Ngakoue. Yannick Ngakoue didn't work out for the Ravens. And they gave up a third and a fifth for him. And he spent half the year in Baltimore. It didn't work. He goes and signs with, a team after that in Las Vegas where, again, it didn't work for the Ravens in that way. And that was a rental. And they gave up a lot. So it could have been the same exact thing where the Ravens give up that for Roquan. It doesn't work and he leaves. But I think the Ravens made that trade knowing that he'd be a great fit. And obviously he was. So who can transform the Ravens this time around? Is it a player? Is it a trade? How do you do it? Is it even a coach, right? Does a coach come in and maybe transform? Is it Zach Orr who steps in for Mike McDonald essentially? If I had to guess, where the Ravens can get maybe a quote unquote transforming type player, honestly, I feel like a wide receiver would be that. We've talked about wide receiver for so long. And again, a guy like a Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley or a Josh Jacobs, those are studs and would certainly provide a different type of identity to the Ravens running back room. But the Ravens have not had a pure number one wide receiver in so long. Now, if everything works out for Zay Flowers, as I've said, he's certainly on that path. I'm not saying he is not. But to me, I don't necessarily know who it would be. I mean, Mike Evans is available, although I don't necessarily think he even leaves Tampa at this point. I mean, do you look to a guy like a Stephon Diggs if he becomes available at some point, if there's disgruntled stuff there? I mean, those types of players like an A.J. Brown that could have traded for, DeAndre Hopkins back when he was with Houston, right? Could have traded for him too. Even DeAndre Hopkins right now would kind of be that transformed player. Or if it's a draft pick, here's what I think. If it's a draft pick, I think a corner, Ennis Rakestraw, or you go Kool-Aid McKinstry, right? Some of these top flight corners would certainly be a transforming type of deal because with Marlon, he suffered a lot of injuries last year. Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stevens was awesome, but he's not on a contract. I think a top flight corner prospect could give you a bit of a bump on that defense. Not that they necessarily needed it because they were so good and so talented last year. But that's why I more so look to the offensive side of the ball. You want to know who else could be a transforming player? You bring in one of the top offensive linemen in the draft. Now, I don't think they're in the Joe Alt conversation, right? I feel like for him, that's somebody that is going to go far too early for the Ravens to figure out, can we move up into the top five? Not going to happen, right? They're not going to be in that category. But to me, whether it's a guy like, I don't even know who I would go. I mean, Patrick Paul to me is more of a second-round prospect, but there are probably 7 or 8 first-round guys you could go to. And if the Ravens want to bring in someone who's highly athletic, fits the offensive scheme a little bit more on the offensive line, and maybe if it's a tackle, if you decide to keep Ronnie Stanley, you decide to keep Morgan Moses, maybe you kick a guy into guard for a year, right? You get some versatility and you do that. And so you're still getting contributions from your first round pick, because that's one of my, I don't know if fear is the right word, but that's one of the things I'm kind of looking at here, where your window is right now if you're the Ravens. And if you're spending your first round pick on a tackle offensive lineman that's not going to play his rookie season, sit behind Ronnie Stanley, sit behind Morgan Moses, that is not the best use of your first round pick. I think you have to get immediate contribution because your window is now. Whenever you have Lamar Jackson, you have a chance, right? I'm not trying to say that, just because the Ravens, they lost in the championship game, that, and, Lamar's going to have all these years of his prime, but then it's going to end eventually. I think whenever you have Lamar, you have a chance. But this is the best chance. These are the best years you have of Lamar. And every year you don't win a Super Bowl is the best year you are wasting from Lamar Jackson. It's like every other NFL franchise. So to me, I'm fine with the Ravens taking a tackle in the first round. I'm cool with it 100%. But if you keep Ronnie Stanley and keep Morgan Moses, I don't think you can afford to just have that guy sit for a full season and be like, all right, we used our first round pick on a talented player, but he's not going to play. You need to maximize on your draft picks, maximize on your draft capital. So I think that if you pick an offensive lineman here with versatility, and we've seen a lot more guys come out of college that have more versatility as opposed to maybe in the early 2000s or some of these other years where it was really you play a position and that's that. Versatility has become pretty king in the NFL, really, really important. And so I'm interested to see how it all works out in terms of if the Ravens decide it's time to take an offensive lineman, because in the second round, I feel more confident in the second round if the Ravens took an offensive lineman like a tackle and they sat behind those guys for a year. First round, though, I just feel like you need immediate production there, like what Zay Flowers did for them during his rookie season. So there are a lot of different types of players that could transform the Ravens. They're in a good spot right now already. Of course, the free agent class is going to be difficult to retain everybody. And of course, depending on what happens with Justin Madubuike, whether you re-sign him to an extension or franchise tag him, it actually makes your offseason look a little different either way. So there are a lot of different paths the Ravens could go this offseason, but in my opinion, I think that Baltimore is still in a good position. They just have to do a good job. Eric DeCosta, really important offseason for him, much like last offseason where he was able to hit on his veteran signings and hit on his draft picks, at least the early ones like Zay Flowers. And now I think you're going to get even more contributions this upcoming season. That's all I have for you today on Locked On Ravens. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, follow along in audio form, video form, the whole 9 yards. Plenty of Ravens content coming your way. We'll take a 2-day break. We're coming back here on Monday on Locked On Ravens with more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here on Monday on Locked On Ravens.